start. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Return to Work Week, powered by Workingmums.co.uk. I'm Gillian Nissim, founder of Working Mums, and I'm your host for today. Working Mums has been supporting job seekers looking for a better work-life balance for over 17 years, and we're really excited to introduce Return to Work Week. The week puts a spotlight on those organisations that are supporting women who want to return to work after a career break by offering work that works for them, as well as providing expert advice on everything from CV writing to negotiating flexible working. Today, we're focusing on career change, and I'm really delighted to welcome Liz Sebag-Montefiore. Good morning, Liz. And Liz is our expert today. She's a career coach, an executive coach, employment engagement specialist, and one of our experts on Workingmums.co.uk. Liz is going to be helping you to think about whether a career change is right for you, and if it is, she'll give advice on how to start your journey, how to overcome barriers and next steps. So good morning, Liz. I'm going to kick off with a question to start. And we've recently carried out a survey, and in that survey, 44% of our audience said that they want to change their careers but don't know where to start. What advice would you give?
Well, I think it's about rewinding that. It's about unpeeling the layers of an onion and thinking, what do I want from life at this stage of my career? Do I want a career change? Do I not want a career change? What could that possibly look like? Most people actually spend longer planning their holiday than they do their career, and yet 2 weeks, a month later, their holiday is a distant memory. And there's a number of little exercises that you can do, but one of them that comes to mind is the career lifeline exercise, where you've got years down one axis and all the jobs you've had down the other, and you plot the peaks and troughs. And so you understand where there's a peak, it's around, well, what was going well then? What did you enjoy doing? Where do you get your energy from? And with the troughs as well, what wasn't working for you? And that can help you work as one of the exercises that can help you work out what's right for you going forward.
And if you if you kind of don't know where to start, you think that the career change, you've done that exercise and you think a change is right. Where do you go from there? What's the next step?
Yeah, so I use the intelligent career model that looks at that knowing why bit, which is about your values, your strengths, what's going to get you out of bed in the morning. Then it's around knowing how, which are your skills and your talents, both those that you love doing, that you're good at, and that you want to develop. And I think that development bit is really important going forward. And then the last area of the model is that knowing whom, which is your network and your personal brand. So, what do people say about you when you're not in the room? And is that consistent with what you want to do going forward? So I think it's understanding what you want to do. And if a career change is right for you, it's around understanding, what are your strengths? What are your passions? What do you love doing? What are your interests? And you can get feedback, for a self-assessment, you can understand what you'd like, but also from colleagues, suppliers, peers, people you've worked with in the past, friends, gym friends. It could be any people in your network, asking them as well, getting feedback on what they see your strengths at work or not at work are, and seeing if there are any themes, because I think it's all about where you get your energy from, looking at what you want to do going forward. And then it's about building that career plan to help you get there. And once you know what it is you want to explore, for instance, recently I've been working with someone who worked in financial services, and they wanted to retrain as a teacher. So then it's understanding, what skills, knowledge, expertise do you need in that new role that you want to do? And where are you to date? And then looking at that skills gap analysis, thinking about, well, is it, for instance, work experience for some roles? Is it a course and training? And also, do you want to do that? Because I think a lot of people have ideas around what they would like to do, but they don't realize how you get there and quite how much work is involved. But once you've understood everything that you need to do to get there, then it's about prioritizing things, what's critical at the moment, and is there anything that can wait a bit? And then start to put that career plan in place over a timeline that suits you in your new setup. So that's quite a helpful tool, just to understand what it is you need by way of skills, knowledge, expertise, and doing that skills gap. But it really comes down to, what is it that you want that you want to do. And when you look at the difference between a value and a strength, and skills, and what it is that you want to do, after this presentation, I'm really happy to share an exercise that you can do that looks at, if you take your values, these are, if you cut yourself in half, this is your DNA, it runs through you, it's the authentic you, and it's around what, I've got a list of personal values and a list of career values. And I have 3 header cards. One is very important, i.e. what's critical for you in this next role, whether it's a career change, whether it's not a career change, but what's critical. Then it's sort of, so quite important and not important, but you've got very, quite, and not. And you just have all these values that you put under each heading and do the exercise. And it will really help you work out whether a career change is right for you. And, for instance, flexibility might be something that's changed since you've had kids, or a short distance to work as another example. But it will just help you prioritize what's right for you now and what you need to be doing. And it's also quite a useful exercise, for instance, if you can't decide which job to go to, or if you even get 2 job offers, coming back to your values is really, really key.
That's brilliant, Liz. Thank you. And yes, we'll make sure that everybody, everyone on the call has access to that document afterward. Thank you. And I can see lots of people joining the chat. Please do use the chat function, everybody, to ask any questions you may have. And we, as we go through this morning, we'll endeavour to answer as many of those as we can. But yeah, really, that sounds like a really useful exercise, Liz. And I think, a career change too, there can be maybe confidence barriers and other psychological barriers and not psychological barriers. I mean, on that theme, what kind of barriers have you seen when it comes to someone looking for a career change, and what advice do you give in overcoming those?
I absolutely agree, Gillian. Confidence, I think, is a big thing, particularly some of the women I've been coaching recently who've been saying, well, I can't do that, or what if it goes wrong and I fail, or it's just I'm exhausted with young children at home. I just don't think I've got the energy to do what I want to do. I think confidence is a big one. Self-belief, imposter syndrome, and a little tool when it comes to imposter syndrome is, I think, a lot of people talk about this gremlin in the back of their mind or wherever it is that's saying you can't do this. And I think it's realizing that it's always going to be there, but you can shrink it and you can send it to the back of your mind to actually give you that confidence to think, if I really want to achieve something, I can do it, but I need to have that self-belief and that drive and that passion and that energy. So I think my tip is, if you really want to do something, you can make it happen, but believe that you can make it happen. And then I suppose another tip I was just going to say, there's different ways of planning your career. Some people who want to do a career change and then realize maybe it's not for me, the easiest thing to do is to go back into an old role, and then you can see if you can change your job. So that is another option that some people don't always think of, but it's around, what is it that you didn't get in your old job that you now want? So it's really, I'm making a list of those non-negotiables and the nice to haves, because, or even if it's not going back to your old job, what clients or suppliers from that old job, have that tangential link. So it's not too new and too scary, but it's more of an easier link between your old job and a potential new one. But something to ask for if you do go back to an old job is, maternity coaching, or parental leave coaching is an excellent way to help people rebuild that confidence, resettle, get an internal mentor, understand boundaries, and just do a trial period of whatever the new working life might be. But maternity coaching is something that I think people have said is really, really helpful when going back to an old company.
Thank you. And just going back on the points on confidence and imposter syndrome, and something we were just talking about a little earlier before the webinar started, is what we're seeing more and more of, and what we've seen in a number of the webinars we've been running this week, is employers saying that actually they're looking for attitude and aptitude, and even if someone's looking to move to quite a different industry sector, there are skills that can be trained on the job, and it's about that kind of showing passion, I guess, for that particular role, sector, industry, and willingness to learn as much as, and the transferable skills themselves are really important.
Absolutely. And I think some people think, oh, you know, if they want to use transferable skills to a new sector, that's just a big leap. But actually what we're seeing in the marketplace is a lot of people see that as an opportunity, as an advantage to have someone who doesn't necessarily come from that sector, because they can bring that outside knowledge in, however long a career gap is. You know, as long as, you know, you've been networking. That's another tip. I think when you are often out of a job and in a career break, always try and continue to network and add value to people, because then it's always much easier to call upon a favor if you've been helping them throughout. It's the number one tip that you know, in terms of a job search. Networking, adding value to people, building relationships for the long term, I believe is really key. But yeah, don't be put off by applying for a job in a new sector because you don't have experience in that sector. I've seen people are much more open to that because of the other transferable skills you can bring.
Brilliant. Thank you, Liz. And I'm just having a quick look at some of the questions that are coming in. Someone's asked what the name of the model is that you were talking about, the values, strengths.
Yeah, it's called the Intelligent Career Theory by Arthur Clamant and Philippi. But what I'll do is I'll share that in the follow-up after.
Brilliant, thank you. So everyone, we will make sure you do have access to that. Question from Mandy is, where do you start if you want to change sector?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's understanding do you have an understanding what sector might suit you? And so it comes down to whether you've got ideas, and then if you have got, so I'm thinking about someone in particular who was ex-army and then went to civilian life, and all they knew was the army. And so they just came up with sectors that were exciting to them. And then coming back to the work experience point, ask for a day's work experience in some of these companies that, you know, across different sectors, to see if that suited them. But they also spent time networking with people in those sectors to see if, whether they're friends, family, but just to see if what their views were on it and if it aligned with their career values. But I think talking to people in the marketplace really helps. And actually, the great thing is if you talk, you know, for instance, this person I worked with tried 3 different sectors, and the learn was that none of them, having done work, was right for them. But that's a great thing, because then, you know, you can stop that search and this person ended up in property, which was a real passion of theirs. So I think there's so much choice, almost too much choice. It can sometimes be harder, but my advice would be just to explore, carry on having conversations, and almost like trial and error. But if you do see, you know, if you've got some contacts at that strategic level who can really help you in your career, whether it's offering work experience, having a chat, introducing them to colleagues, you know, do take that up. And then one other thing, just that's bringing me on to say something else I can follow up with, coming back to that strategic networking piece. I think a lot of people, some people love networking, others find it really hard because they don't like asking for favors. But one tool that can be quite helpful is when you download your contacts off LinkedIn and you score people 1 to 3 on 1 being low, 3 being high, around, you add 3 different columns, and it's around how well do I know that person? Have I added value to them? And the third one, which is slightly more subjective, is if that person were to make a call, would the recipient take it? And all the 3 by 3 by 3s are the ones to contact first, because they'll be your eyes and ears, looking, you know, helping you look for jobs. And 75% of jobs come through your networking connections. So it's quite a helpful job, quite a helpful exercise.
And can I take it one step, maybe even further back, if it's a completely new sector, and if you've built your LinkedIn network on a, you know, based on a role you've been doing for quite a long time, and you're kind of needing to start from scratch in building a bit of a network, or yeah, I mean, what do you do?
Yeah, going on LinkedIn, there are so many groups on LinkedIn, you know, property networking groups, private equity insurance groups. So I think there's a lot you can find out from LinkedIn, but then also asking people, because if you know anyone in that particular sector, obviously that's the best way, and to ask what they'd recommend in terms of networking groups, but also just getting out to events, whether they're virtual, which might suit some people, particularly if there's childcare issues. But I think just trying to do some of that social networking, balancing it with some learning. But I'd have LinkedIn as a starting point, because there are so many groups.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm just again having a look. We've had a load of questions coming in, so I'm going to come to some of these straight away. From Jenny, if it's been a long time since you looked at careers, what's the best way of finding out about the new ones out there?
Yeah, really good question. I think it's around reading up about it, seeing, well, a lot of it, technology is a massive sector, whether it's fintech, AI, the world of work is changing, and there's been so much around those new jobs. I mean, for instance, HR Magazine does a lot of articles on future skills, future jobs. A tech company called Fuel 50 also publishes a lot of articles. So I think there's just quite a lot in the press around that. But then it's around what's right for you. There's also there's also different ways to learn. I mentioned if you haven't got any sector experience, how can you get that? And I think companies are much more lenient. There's also ways, if someone needed a particular skill on an IT program or whatever it might be, YouTube seems to be the go-to place on how to understand how to do X, Y, or Z. Or podcasts is a great way of learning, and webinars. There's a lot of free content out there. LinkedIn Learning. So I think it's always around that self-development as well, how you can appreciate as an asset, how you can learn to show that at interview, if you've been in a different sector for a while or out of work for a while, that you have been learning whilst you've been off. So you turn what you might see as a low confidence negative into a positive.
Thank you. And actually that leads on really nicely to a question from Kerry, who asked, how do you get considered for entry-level roles in a new field when you have long experience in a totally different field?
Yeah, this question can come up a lot, and also on that, ATS, applicant tracking systems are big as well. And I discovered yesterday that 75% of CVs go through ATS systems, and only 25% are read by humans, which is a huge and quite shocking stat. So I think a lot of it is about, do you have Word? Given an ATS system is likely, if you're not going through a networking contact, is likely to be the first point of call. It's around, do you have those acronyms, those words? Do you have those keywords and those algorithms to also work it out? But then taking a step back, it's around, once you know the industry that you want to go into that you don't have any experience in, who in your network, is there anyone that or secondary, the joy of LinkedIn is obviously you've got your first degree connections, but you can see your second and your third. Can you ask for a network contact through a network to see what you need in order to stand out for a CV and an interview?
Thank you. That's really really good advice there. And Alex has asked, are apprenticeships a viable option to find a way into a new sector, or are these only aimed at younger workers?
I think it depends on the sector. So the construction industry obviously are very key on apprenticeships. And I think in their areas, it tends to be at the more junior level. And it's a really interesting question, because I think a lot of people, who've got years of experience, leadership experience in a certain organization, but nothing in a new one. I've seen now it is easier for people to see that transferable skill and all the skills you can bring to the new sector. And so you don't need to start at the bottom, because you've got reams and reams of experience. So it's really about how you present yourself on a CV, I think, is really, really key.
Thank you. Yeah, linked to that, Abigail's saying she's recently started a training program in data governance and finding it hard to get an apprenticeships. I mean, she's saying apprenticeships still seem to be the people at uni or under a certain age. I
think, I think they are, and it is so competitive out there, which is, I think, why it brings back to what are your USPs. And if you haven't yet had a job, if you're a graduate, apprenticeships is a great way to start. But I think if you've got a lot of experience, I think it's around looking at what are the routes into entry, but at your level, because also if you've got all this experience, you don't want to take a huge salary drop. Understanding there might be a bit of a salary drop because it's new sector, so you've got to learn in order to move up. But I think it's being realistic. But don't think that the experience you've got over the years is carries no weight, because it absolutely does.
Thank you. And just coming back to the ATS point, applicant tracking systems, for anyone who's not sure what that is. I'm finding it very hard to go past the ATS system and get response from the employer in order to change career as a new mum. Sometimes it's demotivating. How can I be consistent and try in a different way?
Goodness, ATS systems are definitely not my area of expertise. I think it's the best way as to how you can get a human. So it's how, in order to get your CV in front of a human through LinkedIn, who do your connections know that know the point of purchase, i.e. the acquisition, the head of acquisition, the recruiter, the recruiting person internally, is the best way. But if you genuinely don't know anyone, it's around the algorithms and getting those keywords. And there are in fact, what I'll do as a follow-up in this is put a link to a company that I've been recommended, where you can basically upload your CV to see if anything's missing for a particular role, and see what words stand out, and see how you've got best chances of getting through an ATS. So I'll share that.
Fantastic, thank you. So we've got lots of information coming your way, everyone. I was so helpful post on the chat from one of my colleagues. We covered ATS systems on Monday. There's a link in the chat to that article, which will hopefully be helpful, and we'll include that in information we're sending out. A couple of questions, Liz, come back to the challenges around network. Most recently, what would you recommend for someone who's experienced of over 5 years but not in the UK? How should I go about it? I obviously don't know anyone. How do I network?
So are you now in the UK or wanting to come to the UK?
Yes, so that's AM, whoever AM is. Are you now you could let us know whether you're now in the, yes, she's already in the UK.
They're in the UK and been away for 5 years. Yeah, and I also think it's being realistic around what you can achieve, because I think if you know what you want to do and what sector you want to go into, I think it's around if we're starting from scratch, building your network. It could just be locally as well, where you live, talking to people around what they do jobs wise, and understanding and asking them if they know of anyone in the sector you want to go into. And I think it's starting small but being realistic and growing. But LinkedIn does have a lot of networking groups professionally, but I would also go locally as well, because you just never know where the next opportunity is going to come from.
Thank you. So, and another question on how do you make your experience stand out when it was so long ago? And in Dawn's case, it was 14 years ago.
Yeah, I think I'd create, there's 2 types of CVs. You've got the reverse chronological, which shows the years on the front page. And then you've got the skills-based optional CV, which doesn't have the years on the first page. It's all about taking 3, 4, 5 skills, for instance, relationship building, organizational skills, and then you put bullet points under each of the skills so that people can see where your skills and strengths are. And then on page 2, on the reverse of that page, that's where you put your career history with dates. But it just means the recruiter, the first thing they see isn't drawn to the time you've been out of work. It's drawn to what you can achieve and what your skills are.
Thank you. And just then taking things to getting past ATS systems, and assuming you've got past the ATS systems, you've got an interview in a new for a company in a new sector. What advice would you give in terms of being able to demonstrate why you're right for that role? Showing your passion, interest in the role. Are there certain things we should be thinking about?
You've obviously got the job spec. I would try and mirror that and think about what you've done. And also, in terms of the competency-based questions, always answer what you learnt from the experience as well. So the STAR, situation, task, action, result, but then what was the learn? I think some people miss off in terms of the competency-based, but try and mirror what they're looking for and give good, solid examples of what you've done previously in another organization, another sector, but easily transferable. And also, if you're a quick learner, if there's anything that's missing on the job description, see if you can get it from an introduction to the thing that's missing from podcasts and YouTube. So to show that you're a keen learner and that you're already on the journey, and then hopefully the company will provide you with training in the gap. But yeah, I think it's just having the best advice I could give is have a really good elevator pitch about you, bringing you to life in that minute around basically why they should hire you. And again, I can put a link to a video on how to create a strong elevator pitch as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And how important is we're coming back to LinkedIn as well, and groups on LinkedIn. How important do you think it is to make sure you're following groups relevant to that sector and getting engaged in those conversations?
Yeah, I personally believe it's important because it shows that you've got a voice as well, and and then also it helps you with your competitor information, your market knowledge, which is what, if you're trying to build up, that's an easy place to start. So I always advise my clients to follow the company on LinkedIn that they're interviewing at, so then they can see what employees themselves are saying about the company. And then obviously, you can chop and change as time goes on, stop following companies, start following companies, and seeing it more as a moving document, but evolving document. But I would always, if you think that you're getting value from the group, join it, and if you, after a while, you're not, then come off it. But I also think it's not just following the company, it's also engaging with it. And if you read an article on future skills as an example, and you agree or disagree, put a comment on it, because it gets your name out there and gets you having a voice.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. So I mean, I think, yeah, LinkedIn can be hugely helpful. Just looking at the questions again. Dawn said a skills-based CV sounds very interesting. Do you usually advise 2 pages for a CV?
Yes, I would always advise 1 side or 2 pages, so the same thing, because any longer, if a recruiter's got to read 500 CVs, they just pass off if it's more than two pages. 1 page or 2 sides. That would be my maximum. That said, in certain industries like the higher education sector, where people write all their publications, there are certain sectors where you're allowed longer, but in the general rule of thumb, I'd say is that. Keep it short.
Thank you. Another great question here. My confidence is really low and I've had quite a lot of rejections. How do you keep motivation?
It's a really good question. It's that resilience. It's that Chumbawamba song, I get knocked down, but I get up again. It's constantly thinking, how can you what can you learn from it? And again, it's a hard one because sometimes you don't get any feedback. If it's nerves, interview nerves, which is really common, are the tools and tips you can give yourself, like listening to, well, whatever calms you down. For some it's classical music. Do you think doing breathing techniques, listening to classical music, feeling good in the moment just before the interview? I'm sorry, that was when I say listening to classical music and breathing, that was sort of slightly more if it was virtual. But what you can do to be at your best at interview, to perform at your best. But it is, and focus on what you can control rather than what you can't. So if in an interview you get asked a question, you just really don't know the answer, don't always feel you have to rush into it. Take time, breathe, and then think about an answer. And actually it's okay to say, can I come back to you on that one? Rather than witter on about something you're just not comfortable about saying. Not everyone is perfect, and I just be you, authentic self, and what feels right to you.
Thank you. We've got more specific question here from Dawn about looking to get into the charity sector. Do you have any specific advice for someone who's looking to get into the
and the charity sector is huge. So I suppose, have you narrowed down what area of the charity sector you're interested in? Is it like Barnardo's and children? Is it social? So it's I suppose I'd start broad, start narrowing down, and then there are a lot of lists of agencies, for instance, that specialize in charity recruiting. Again, I can share those if of interest. There's groups on LinkedIn. I mentioned earlier that the best way of finding a job is through your network. The second best way is through LinkedIn. So see what jobs are out there on LinkedIn as well.
And definitely have a look at Working Mums too. We have an ever-changing list of jobs. A question here from Catherine. Catherine's had major injury and lost 2 jobs because of major setbacks due to her knee. How does she get around that on her CV?
I don't believe you have to declare injury on your CV. So I suppose that would be more getting called at interview, would be my advice.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here. If you're moving to a new sector and don't have real world experience of the new sector, what do you put in your CV? Does mentioning your experience in previous sectors recommended? Even if I did courses for the new sector, I'm not getting any calls for interviews.
I think if it's relevant, because people always say you should have a different CV for each role you apply to. And obviously it's going to be 85% the same, but tweaked for the role. Really, the cover letter is completely from scratch, but CV wise, it's your experience. But I'd always, some people say, do I put education before, or courses before career history? And I always say, well, what's most importantly related, what's most clearly related to the job, and put that first, because you really want them to see that and to be to highlight. So anything that's really relevant. But I wouldn't worry so much about not having the sector experience, just purely because I think people are now, it's more about the skills that you've got and the skills that you can learn. And it's about that culture and company fit, which is so key. I think nowadays, people have made, employers have made so many mistakes about hiring people, and on both sides it's just not working out. So I think that is a much better fit. People hire on culture, even if they haven't quite got all the skills, knowing that they can develop them internally.
I think yeah, I mean, and we certainly see that in Working Mums with the employers we're working with, and more I think of the employers we're working with are proactively, they're saying they're looking for transferable skills, in job ads. So I think that also, would you say that also it comes down to researching the companies you're applying for as well, and maybe, I mean, again, look at our top employer platform, for example, it gives really good information about the companies, what they're looking for, the types of people they're recruiting, and as I said, more and more are being open about welcoming career changes, I think, and people from other industries.
Yeah, in the last couple of years, it's been much bigger, and the more research you can do on the company and what candidate they're looking for. So it sounds like your website's perfect. It's worth spending time to research what the company is looking for, so then you can decide, is it for you or not? Because what you don't want to do, and what I've seen in the past, is where people are so desperate for a job, they apply for anything and everything. And actually, rather than applying for 50 jobs in 1 week, you're applying for 3, but doing them really well, you're far more likely to land that role.
Thank you. Thank you. And I've got more questions. Again, coming back to CVs again, actually, if you're making a functional CV and for a skill, for example, creating strategy, you have examples from 2 companies. Do you mention each company separately? Or do you don't,
when you mention your skills, you don't need to mention the companies that you got those skills, because that will come on the second page. But what I'll do is I'll share, I'm sure you've got one too, but I'll share some functional based CVs so you can see what they look like. But really, it's not around the company, it's purely around the skills that you've got, because it doesn't really matter where you've gained it, it's more that you've got it. And the other tip is you don't want to repeat on a CV, because if you've done it once, they can see you can do it. But yeah, so the first page is all around purely the skills, and then you literally just list the date and the company you worked at on a line on page 2.
And actually that links nicely to another question. I'm just sorry, my screen's moving as I'm speaking. Sorry, just bear with me. How do I summarize skill stroke experience on a 2-page CV from a wide range of experience? I'm in my late 40s, but started working in my teens. So yeah, I mean, that's
I've a lot of people really struggle with cutting it down, and also it's a lot easier to cut someone else's CV than it is your own. But I think stuff that's not relevant, from when you're in your teens or early 20s, just chop out. And what you can do on a CV is put early career, and then just list, if it's worth it, and then just list where the date range and where you worked, but with no bullet points underneath. So therefore that shows that what you were doing early on, but not given too much time to, because obviously the skills you've got more recently will be likely to be more senior. But yeah, I'd only ever include things that are relevant to the job that you want to go for, and that's the best way of cutting. And also another little tool I do is I highlight all of the skills that are in my CV, and the typical CV sentence tends to have 2, I mean, there's a million ways to write a CV, so this is the way we do it, but we do two skills per sentence. So it would start off with a verb in the past tense, like designed, comma, and then implementing whatever you implemented, quantifying what you said you've done. So there are 2 skills, but I tend to highlight all the skills in their CV, and then make sure there's not much repetition, because you don't want to look down a CV and see organized. Try and use that variety of organized, planned, coordinated, and all of that, just to give that breadth. And also for the algorithms on the ATS, it then ticks a lot of boxes for skills you've got, rather than one skill seen 3 times.
That's really helpful. That's really, really good advice, as it all is. Thank you, Liz. Another question is more on CVs, actually, because this seems to be a really, it's a really important part, obviously, of the process. I think it's Emma says, I've not been working for the last few years due to my disabled son having a leg amputation. I've gained so many, sorry, my screen's been jumping again. I've gained so many skills from this gap due to being my son's advocate. I'm worried about how to explain this on a CV, as it may put off potential employers in terms of being reliable. How do I get around this, please?
I think it's around saying exactly what skill, what you've learned, because also it's also about skills of life as well. And I think putting that on your CV, if you said it was a 3-year gap, what have you learned? And also as a person, you've gained all those. Well, you hadn't worked, but I think it's really important to be authentic to yourself and to share the skills that you've now learned from being a carer. And you can put that on, and people recruit, they trust on honesty, because it's how you show that gap. You want to be true to yourself, you want to show what you've done, and it is also pretty common, but it's about putting it on, feeling comfortable with what you say, and putting it as a positive so that you're attractive to potential employers, and they will, they'll see you're worth your salt when you get asked for an interview. But it's just think about what you think an employer would be looking for and how that's best translated into a CV. Is what I do, and put the dates.
Thank you, Liz. And another question linked to CVs and LinkedIn, actually. Another question I have is, when I tweak my CV slightly, depending on the job I'm applying for, I can't really tweak my LinkedIn profile for jobs. So will it show differing profiles to the recruiter if they look me up on LinkedIn and my CV?
It's a really good question. Not many people change their LinkedIn profile for a job. You tend to change your CV for a job, but obviously they do check you out with your online brand and what you're saying about yourself. I think the main thing, obviously your experience is your experience, but it's more around underneath your name, you've got that blurb, those 4, 5, 6 words that you can write. So it's quite tricky if you're applying for a couple of different roles. So in that bit, I would almost list the things that you're interested in, because otherwise, and keep it static, because you just don't know, depending on the job you've applied in the different sectors, you don't know who's going to click on it and when. So I would put who you think you are in those 4 or 5 words directly underneath your name, and then keep it. And then in the about section, or I think it's called summary or about, that's where you can have all those keywords to help with the algorithm, so you're seen on the LinkedIn jobs that get advertised.
Brilliant, thank you. And I can see we're kind of coming to the end of our time. We've got loads of information from today, and a lot to send out to everybody, which is fantastic. And Liz, can I ask you, put you in a position here too, if you were to summarize, I mean, if you've set out really well the steps for trying to work out whether a career change is right. I mean, if you were to summarize for us the next steps, if a career change is right, what would they be? Where do we go from here?
I think if a career change is right, and you know what that is and the sector, it's around putting in place that plan in order to achieve your goals. I also think it's really important to think about the short term and the long term. So if in 3 to 5 years time you want to be in this particular role, what is it that you need now in order to get there, and then start building the skills, knowledge, expertise. So I think it's around writing your career plan, and also all the research shows if you write a career plan down, you're much more likely to achieve it. But understand, and it can just be on your phone, so and understand that it's movable and it's not set in stone, because a lot of people say, oh, but then can it change? But just understanding that it can change, but it could just be quite helpful to reflect upon it. So I'd do that identification piece, and also believe that if you really want to do something, you will do it, but who can help you do it? And it's about calling upon that help, whether that's a networking connection, friends, family, past colleagues, but in that network, who is it that can help you achieve what you need to achieve in the short and long term?
Thank you, Liz. Thank you so much. So everybody, we will be sending out a recording of today's session to everybody, along with links to all the information Liz has been talking about this morning, and articles on the website. Please do also visit our career transition page for more advice on changing your career path, and also the video from Emma Alkiri earlier in this week on how you make sure potential employers notice your CV and really see those transferable skills. But Liz, thank you so much for your time this morning. Really invaluable information, tips and advice. So really appreciate that. And thanks to all of you for joining us. We will, as I said, be sending out a recording of the session. We'll also be sending out a feedback form, which would be really grateful if you could take a couple of minutes to fill that in for us, and hope you'll join us for the remaining sessions this week. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye.